Okay, we're going to practice on how to factor polynomials that their leading coefficient is 1. When I say leading coefficient here, I'm talking about when you have a polynomial, it usually looks something like this. And the leading coefficient is the number that's in front of the variable with the highest exponent. So in other words, these are polynomials that where a is 1. So you're going to have an x squared plus something x plus some constant is equal to 0. Well, actually, you don't even have the 0 part because we're not talking about equations yet. But basically, that means that there's no coefficient in front of the x. So those are the easiest ones to factor. So again, what is a factor? A factored form is basically the reverse of foiling or multiplying out the polynomial. So what happens is you're going to be given this polynomial this way and asked to factor it out. And so you're trying to break it into its smaller parts. What did you start with to get this polynomial? That's the question. It's kind of going backwards. It's very kind of a weird thing to think about. So in order to understand how to go backwards, let's talk about how we would go forwards. Now, up to now, you may have just gotten binomials, and then you knew how to FOIL them. And so foiling stands for the first two terms, the outside terms, which are the ones on the outside, the inside terms, and then the two last terms, 3 times 4. Okay? So if you look at the pattern of firsts, let's just look at the first. When you multiplied these two binomials, what did you notice about the first terms in every single one? Well, the first terms are actually just x times x. You ended up with x squared, and you started with an x in each one of these binomials. So that helps us because if we're going backwards from x squared, well, then we know that we're going to start with an x and an x because x times x is always going to give me the x squared. Let's look at the last term. The last term is always multiplied. 3 times 4 gave us 12. Negative 3 and negative 4 also gave us positive 12. Positive 3 and negative 5 gave us negative 15. So if you notice in your answer, you're going to look for two numbers that multiply to give you this answer. So the first term is always going to be our firsts. Our last term that we ended up with came from these two last terms that were multiplied. So that's going to help us when we're trying to go from this to a factored form. When we're trying to go backwards, it's going to help us to see that pattern, okay? Because we're going to know that this last term came from multiplying these two numbers. Now, what about this middle term? How did we get to the middle term? Well, the middle term was the outside and the inside added together. We added the 4x and the 3x to get the 7. We added the negative 4 and the negative 3 to get the negative 7x. We added the two outside and inside terms. So that's going to help us later because there may be more things that multiply to 12 than 3 and 4. There can be 6 and 2, 12 and 1, negative 1, negative 12. I mean, all kinds of things. So the key is this middle term also has to work out. And that's kind of the hardest one. So the first terms, the last terms are pretty straightforward. And then you're going to look at the middle term. All right, so let's go through some of the process. Okay, so here we have a basic polynomial where the coefficient is the leading coefficient is 1. And whenever you start doing, here are the steps. The first thing you notice is that that first term came from x times x. So you can already start factoring this out into its pieces, its smaller parts, by doing an x and an x because you already know x times x is x squared. Then you look at your constant and you say, well, what two numbers are possible to give me that last constant? And so you write those out. Then you're going to try different combinations of those numbers, just like we had in the example before. We had the 3 and the 4 and the negative 3 and the negative 4. Both of those gave me the 12 that I was looking for, but then I have to kind of figure out that middle term. So then you look at your outside term and your inside term that you created with your own binomials. These are the things that you're trying because you don't know. You're trying to factor it out. And you add your inside and outside together and say, hey, does that equal the inside-outside term that I have in my answer? Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Then when you're finished, go ahead and check it by foiling it back together. If for some reason none of these combinations work out, then you'll have to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's look at this. So we want to factor. Our first step was to go ahead and factor it into two binomials. We know that x times x squared, x times x will give us x squared. So we already know the first part. Okay? The next part is looking at the last term. Because again, our answer has to equal what we started with. What we're doing is we're taking this larger polynomial and we're breaking it up into its smaller binomials or smaller parts. Okay? So what times what will give us 8? Well, 1 times 8 gives us 8, or 2 times 4, or maybe two negatives will give us 8, because a negative times a negative will give us 8. Okay? But remember, I want my answer, my final answer to be 8, but I need my middle answer to be 6, right? So I'm looking for something that when I multiplied it out, then it'll give me 8, but when I add it, it'll give me 6. So let me rewrite this so this makes sense. So this first combination is x plus 1 and x plus 8, because this will give me the x squared and this will give me my 8. But then I have to check my inside and my outside. So I add my 1x to my 8x and I get 9x. Well, that's not what I'm looking for. I need a 6. So let's try the next one. X plus 2 and x plus 4. I'm getting that from my factors of 8. So x times x is x squared. 2 times 4 is 8. So my inside and my outside added together, this is 2x and this is 4x. When I add 2x and 4x together, I get 6x. That's what I wanted. So this is the one that I'm going to use. That's my answer. So that's my best combination. So then when I get my best combination, I check it, right? Which is the same thing. First, outside, inside, last, combine my middle terms, and this is the same as what I began with. Okay, they're the same. So that means that I took my polynomial and instead of foiling it out, which is what you did before, we're doing the backwards and saying, hey, I wanted to factor it. Okay, so here, oh, I uncovered it by mistake, but oh well. Okay, so again, you take your x and your x, and we know that's going to give us x squared. We need something times something to give us 6. 1 and 6 give us 6. 2 and 3 give us 6. Okay, so we're going to try both combinations. So x plus 1 and x plus 6 will give us that last term, but look at the inside and the outside. X and 6x gave us 7x. That's not the middle term. Trying the second one, x plus 2 and x plus 3, x squared worked out. My 2 times 3 works out. But my 2x and my 3x add together to give me 5x, and that's the answer that I want. You can check it out when you FOIL it, and you get that answer. All right, I want you to try these in earnest. That means truly try them. Don't just keep going in the video. Try them yourself. Okay. All right. What about this one? This has a minus in it now, so it's a little bit trickier because now you're going to need something negative. Okay. Now remember, when you're multiplying, you have to get a positive 8. But when you're adding the middle terms, you need a negative 6. So I probably wouldn't have used any of these because they're not going to give me a negative middle term. So I need something that multiplies. A negative times a negative will give me a positive. A negative times a negative will give me a positive. But that when I'm adding that inside and outside term, I'm adding the negative 2x and the negative 4x, I'm going to get myself that negative 6x. All right, a little bit more practice coming up. Okay, so try this. We're looking for things that multiply to give me negative 35, but then add to give me positive 2. Okay, so I can think of like 7 and 5, or negative 7 and positive 5, or positive 7 and negative 5. And so you just try different combinations. Okay, and this sum column basically came from the inside outside added together. So like when I tried this x minus 1 and this x plus 35 here, okay, because I just put them in these spots. The inside is negative x and the outside is positive 35x. I added those together to get positive 34x. So that's where this sum part is coming from. The sum is just the O and the I added together. Okay, because remember when we FOIL, the first we got no problem, the last we got no problem. It's that middle term. Okay, try this one. Okay, hopefully you did well. All right. What if you have two variables? What if there's x's and y's all mixed in there? No problem. Use the same strategy that you used before. No worries. So our first term, we automatically know that in order for x squared to be our answer, we had to have started with x and x, right? X times x is going to give me x squared. I'm good. What about this y squared thing? Well, we know that there had to be a y and a y to give me a y squared in the end. Now we just have to worry about where did the 6 come from? So the 6 can come from 1 and 6. Now there's negatives here, so now we got to get negatives involved, okay? Or negative 2 and negative 3, because negative 2 and negative 3 will multiply to give me a positive, but then when I'm adding that inside-outside term, it'll give me a negative. Well, I can look right now and say that when I add these two, I get a negative 5, and negative 5 is what I'm looking for. So let's try this. Okay, so let's FOIL it out. This is what I think is going to happen. So the first outside is negative 3x and y. I'm going to go ahead and put the x first because we put it in alphabetical order. And then negative 2x and y. Again, we're going to put x's and y's in alphabetical order. Negative 2 times negative 3 is positive 6. And y times y is y squared. And look, these are both xy terms, so we can combine them. And that will be my final answer. Okay? Okay, now you try this one. Think about how we did the one above. Okay, hopefully you started with x's in the front, y's in the back. The only thing that multiplies to give us 3 is 1 and 3. But since this is negative, you needed a negative 1 and a negative 3. Okay. Right, so you knew this part. And then you said, okay, I need a negative 1 and a negative 3. And so then when you FOIL it out, right, first, outside, inside, last, when you multiply it out, you get the right answer. All right, good luck.